Hi, my name is Caroline. My journey began at the age of 5 when I was visited by a group of beings who came from the worlds beyond. I called them my spirit family. To others, they were my imaginary friends. Many children have imaginary friends. Mine were real. They appeared as a bright light, and they said they came from another planetary system beyond this galaxy and this universe. They came from a place they call the Source. They were so loving and kind and always emanated what I would call unconditional love. They taught me things like communicating telepathically, healing with energy, seeing things beyond what humans could see and sense. My experiences opened me up to the mysteries of the universe and the science of the unknown. And so I spent the past 15 years of my life sharing my knowledge and experience and helping others with healing and guidance about the infinite power of the human consciousness.
The fact that we are interested in this subject is we're interested in understanding who we are. A lot of us feel that we don't belong, we don't fit, we're probably not from this planet, we want to go back to the stars.
And along the way, I also listened to thousands of people from around the world describe their contact experiences to me. Soon enough, I realized all these people who did not know each other had a story that was strikingly similar. And so it was time to share the contact phenomenon with the rest of the world. More importantly, I was now on a mission to bring scientific validation to my story, as well as others.
There was a craft floating right above the freeway, maybe 50 feet above the freeway, 100 feet above the freeway, massive.
And it was close enough that we could see the porthole windows and faces in the window.
We were floating up to a round craft that was quite low overhead.
This light was like a glowing, expanding energy, and my whole room became illuminated with this morphing, multicolored energy.
I'm going up into the air and into a ship which had a light coming down from the center underneath.
They would pick me up out of the bed and they would bring me aboard their glowing spaceship.
They take my consciousness out of the body and move it to the mothership.
At that point, I then went on board the craft.
I would be there with hundreds of other people my age.
And they would bring me to the planet and introduce me to other kids my age, and we would play together.
I get these calls of people who say, I saw you on the Orion mothership.
I actually met different people on the craft that have come into my life now as an adult.
I was dragged into this kicking and screaming by John Mack, who told me that so many of the people who came to him for psychotherapy, reporting these experiences about the same story.
Dr. Rudy Shield is an emeritus astronomer at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center of Astrophysics. His expertise involves the study of black hole physics, but also as it relates to consciousness. These hundreds of people showing up on a spaceship, where is the spaceship parked?
One is the big mega ship, and that operates well above our atmosphere. And it then discharges little zooming spacecraft that are the little pickup craft. NASA scientists witnessed the fact that 3 of the little shuttle craft approached a much larger ship, something like a blimp, and he said they approached a port to it and then sort of orbited around and eventually spun in. He was working on trying to understand the propulsion of these devices. Where do all of these spacecraft come from, and why are so many different kinds or flavors of spacecraft reported? All makes sense to me. There are more than one civilization visiting us.
It is now clear that contact is a worldwide phenomenon.
The majority of people who I have examined, and I've looked at 1,150 different abduction events, the majority of those events have been when people were awake.
And so it's been about 2,500 regressions that I have conducted to people's experiences directly with extraterrestrial beings.
This happens to people around the world, regardless of their background, regardless of their educational level, regardless of anything.
After 20 years of looking at 3,000 individuals, I found out that this wasn't rare, that this was happening across the globe.
This is not an American phenomenon. This is not a Western phenomenon. This is a global phenomenon.
And it didn't matter what your belief system was, it didn't matter, you know, religious beliefs, scientific beliefs, what age you were, what professions you had. It was doctors, nurses, teachers, it was pilots, it was policemen, it was housewives and farmers and little kids.
I have worked with people from Mali, from Pakistan, from Brazil, Chile, from Europe, and from everywhere else. It's astonishing how many people all around the world all saying the same thing.
Numbers of people in America that are beginning to wake up to the fact that, oh my goodness, that was an extraterrestrial contact.
There's not only thousands, there's potentially millions of people out there that are living this double life.
Millions and growing.
According to the famous Drake equation, astronomers think planets in our galaxy with intelligent life could number anywhere from thousands to millions. However, in 1950, from a skeptical point of view, the nuclear physicist Enrico Fermi posed the question that if intelligent life is so numerous around the galaxy and the universe, well, where is everybody? Why hasn't there been contact? The answer is there has been contact, but showing that contact happens may depend on expanding our idea of what contact really is. And if we knew what these intelligent beings may look like, perhaps they would become more real to us and shed more light on the variety of species that is possible within the universe.
He was a brown being with big gold eyes, and he had slits in his eyes.
I thought they were very elegant, about 7 feet tall.
She is what I would describe as a tall, pure cream white being, and I'm talking the color of milk.
Very narrow, thin people.
The skin texture was very different. It was a lot rougher, a bit reptile in appearance.
His skin color is very dark bluish, I would say, with scales.
And they didn't have ears. They had these kind of giraffe-looking things coming off of their head, like membranes.
With blue skin, like you see in Hindu art.
And the usual idea of a gray alien as the quintessential extraterrestrial has become too small of a concept.
The faces were very human.
Similar features to the human, but their heads I would compare to the ancient Neanderthal head.
And they have huge black eyes that sort of wrap around the side of their head.
And he was very thin, had a long, thin neck.
And the eyes, albeit they were very large, they were actually human eyes.
They were long and rod-like and sort of wrinkly gray.
There are about 60 different types of beings that I've been aware of.
Here in the United States, it's certainly Andromedan, Syrian, gray, Arcturian, and in terms of South America, there is such a deep-rooted Apunian.
There are Pleiadian beings and beings that we consider Nordics because they look like Scandinavian humans.
And don't forget the angels, the archangels. There's also beings coming from very far away in the universe. These beings are very large. They have a consciousness mass that is so large that they don't appear as beings. They appear as just a ball of light. Some of these are the Melchizedeks, the celestial guardians, the gravity and power controllers, the planetary aides, divine sons, and the life architects. Now, these beings are typically not recognized by humans because they don't have any physical features. They simply appear as light, but they are beings nonetheless. The denser type beings seem to appear in people's bedrooms, but other types of beings can appear and communicate with us intradimensionally, which means beyond our three-dimensional reality.
There are many ways contact happens, and that's not just, the abductee, contactee. In the day, they may communicate as mediums do, clairvoyants do. They may do it with spirits, but they'll also do it with ETs as well.
An interdimensional being, meaning any being that we cannot see through 3D. In other words, right now I'm looking at you, but I can also see other beings there, actually. There's tons of them, by the way, outside the room and in here.
We're also talking about interdimensionals, extradimensionals, hyperdimensionals, and probably a lot more that we're not aware of.
Sometimes some of the beings seem to be more dense and physical, and sometimes they are radiating, glowing with light.
I couldn't make out features because there's so much light around it, but it was orange and red light, like solid, pulsating light around the being. They basically said, we are multidimensional beings, we can go in between dimensions, and we exist on our physical plane in a higher octave than you do.
It felt like an angelic consciousness, and they describe themselves as being part of the Arcturian collective consciousness. They're like a group of beings that are actually everywhere. They're in every dimension, they're at every point in time.
In your common language, refer to us as the Arcturians. They said, but for your own understanding, recognize that we do not come from your star, Arcturus. They said, we in fact come from different dimensions of your own planet. And we are, in essence, future versions of yourself.
This phenomenon is not new. There have been contact experiences with angels, archangels, and beings from the stars in numerous historical accounts and biblical scriptures since the beginning of human civilization. These experiences are described as both physical and intradimensional. Could these beings be the gods among us? If we are still asking the questions, it means we have not had clear evidence of the phenomenon of contact. I'm going to attempt to bring compelling scientific validation to these claims. Is that even possible? Dr. Dean Radin is chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. For over 2 decades, he has been engaged in research on consciousness and has conducted numerous laboratory experiments on paranormal phenomena.
So what you do is you take the experiences that people talk about and you operationalize it. You squish it into a form where we can know with high certainty whether the effect is real or not under controlled conditions.
A compelling piece of evidence comes from a famous NASA mission, Apollo 14, and the mission's pilot, Edgar Mitchell.
Edgar Mitchell provided an experiment that could test the speed of consciousness. So he arranged with his Houston handlers that they would take the standard psychological deck of cards. Each card had a single, simple object on it, like a gold star. Something of that kind that can be reduced to 2 words and a single concept. When they did the experiment with a clock present, the handler in Houston said, "Okay, Edgar, I'm turning the card." And Edgar would concentrate and say, "Gold star." and that to the moon should take 4 seconds at the speed of light, and then Edgar clicking his microphone and saying, "Gold star," that should take 4 seconds to transmit back to the Earth. So it should have been a total 8-second transfer time. In fact, they did it in 4 seconds, to the astonishment of all concerned.
What you're saying is that the speed of thought is instantaneous, meaning faster than the speed of light.
That's exactly the point.
If Edgar Mitchell was able to communicate telepathically with Earth across 240,000 miles, then there must be a mechanism that allowed him to do so. And if telepathic communication happened between two humans across time and space, then this could be the key to understanding telepathic contact with all other intelligent life. Is it possible that we may be equipped with an internal mechanism that allows us to communicate telepathically? The best way to find out is to look within our own human DNA. For the past 25 years, Dr. Glenn Ryan has pursued a career in neuroscience, bioelectromagnetics, and DNA research at prestigious institutions such as Harvard and Stanford medical schools.
DNA, of course, is a very interesting molecule. If you're going to study the effect of consciousness on a biological system, you have to choose a biological system that will be relevant for the mainstream, but will be sensitive enough to pick up the energies of consciousness. This is what we're studying, and the biological effects. So I chose a particular system, and that is DNA. What this machine does is it scans many different frequencies. You excite the DNA with a voltage spike at different frequencies, and then you measure the induced current in the second electrode, and that's what's displayed here. I would say that the end physiological, psychological, emotional, or spiritual effect that we might have in response to interaction with an extraterrestrial being, or some spiritual interaction with a god, all these different possible entities could affect our physiological body at any level. And yes, of course, the DNA is just part of that whole gestalt. If it happens within our own body, it can clearly happen between one person and another person. This is a new experiment. We have the DNA that has not been treated by Caroline. Your turn.
Okay. Since I was a child, I've been able to bring energy to others to produce healing. I will now attempt to bring the energy of a spirit being and see if that would affect the DNA sample in any measurable way. If I succeed, then this could bring scientific validation to the contact phenomenon with beings from other dimensional realities. Okay, it's done. So when are you going to get those results?
Oh, as soon as I can. I have them. You'll be the first to know. I promise that.
Dr. Ryan's linking of DNA to any form of spirit or intradimensional interaction could validate scientifically the contact phenomenon. But as always in science, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
We're going to just have to get used to some new physics that's operative out there. But the big problem is because the university crowd won't deal with consciousness, and I could stack books as high as this ceiling that all contain the sentence, but of course we don't have an understanding of consciousness.
Most scientists are still caught up in what I call the classical paradigm, the classical worldview, according to which such phenomena should be impossible.
I mean, I wouldn't want people to walk away thinking that they can just think their way to changing their DNA. That would be an abuse of our current understanding. And I'm certainly not attempting to diminish or degrade that way of thinking. All I'm saying is that there is no current scientific evidence. But just because I say there's no scientific evidence doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means that we haven't found a way to look at it yet.
Experiencers and contactees report powerful transformation when they come in contact with extraterrestrial and non-human presence. But what other physical evidence can we gather from these accounts?
A blue Arcturian physically appeared in my room, and out of his third eye, he shot a white laser beam into my heart.
I was taken to a cave, and there was 4 reptilians that were there, crowded around me.
They would emanate actual heat. When they were in the room with me, there was a distinct difference between when they were gone and when they were there, and it was at least 10 degrees.
And I asked him if I could hold his hand. I wanted to know what it felt like to touch them, and I wanted to know it was real.
And my body would profusely start sweating when they were with me.
All of a sudden, I'd hear their clicking, and I'd know, oh, here they are, and I'd look over, and there they would be standing.
Each of them put their hands on me, and they said, you've asked us a question, and we're going to answer you now.
At first, I couldn't concentrate on anything he said.
They weren't human at all. These were extraterrestrials standing there examining me in the room.
When he allowed me to hold his hand, he had 3 very long, skinny fingers, and at the end of all the fingers were suction cups.
I kept thinking about what dimension am I in, and who is this guy?
This one is bigger than me. A few of them are shorter than me.
Their bodies were making noises that I could hear.
I know he was physical because when I asked him if I could hold his hand, it was a solid hand.
I knew that they were physical because I could physically see them in my presence as well as hear them.
Telepathic communication is based on codes and symbols that anyone can decipher and translate into the language that is stored in their brain. Because the codes are geometric in nature, they are coherent with the brain geometry of all intelligent life. This means all the beings within the universe.
When somebody is in the presence of one of those beings, they do hear the talking telepathically.
Dan Sherman is a retired Air Force sergeant and intelligence specialist. He tells us about a secret program that the United States Air Force had developed to train individuals to communicate telepathically with an alien race.
I got to communicate with an alien species. Let's say if they showed me a picture, my mind would know how to project that in the intuitive communication realm. So I was basically interpreting into intuitive communication what was going into my mind. It definitely did not feel like it was human. Their communications were, first of all, instantaneous. There wasn't a beginning and there wasn't an end in the middle and all that. It would send me numbers like latitudes and longitudes. Eventually, I graduated to somebody intuitively communicating with my mind, and then I was able to sit down and type it out in English.
So telepathy is a non-local connection between two people's minds.
Telepathic communication is very pure. You get the whole message, you understand it. There's probably words, if we had more words in our vocabulary, they could use them to explain that.
It is not English or German or French or Chinese. It is the cosmic universal language.
There's probably a connection between telepathic abilities and symbols.
So the communication wasn't just like, for example, beings communicating words in my head, but it was as if there was like symbols and lights and like emotion.
So you take an entire sentence, let's say, an entire concept, and you basically condense it into a code or a symbol, and you end up with just 3 or 4 codes that actually mean an entire book.
And they would have me look up at the ceiling of my bedroom, and they would start pushing through symbols like, read these symbols, kind of like a hybrid hieroglyphic.
So you have to be trained in understanding how to retrieve the information.
It's a language that you don't know, but it gets decoded in your brain and eventually you understand.
My conscious mind saw the symbols, but my unconscious mind was able to begin to give them some meaning.
You have a human brain that has 10% capacity that learns a human language, stores the language in the brain, and then you can communicate. But you also have the full brain capacity. That is the brain that taps into the universal code, the universal consciousness that is shared by all the other types of intelligent life. So eventually, humans are going to be able to use both the local brain, so to speak, to communicate with other humans, but also tap into their full brain capacity to be able to communicate telepathically with all intelligent life in the universe. More and more evidence shows that there is an interconnected super communication system that is based on symbols, universal codes, and telepathy. Could these universal codes and symbols be the language of the gods among us? If so, what mechanism does the universe use to help us connect with these beings? Though science requires skepticism, some minds at the highest levels are open to asking bold questions about how contact could happen beyond the laws of physics known to men today. Now, from a physics standpoint, how did the signal actually get transferred between the moon and NASA?
The quantum wave, which is the description of all nature and which is buried inside of our 3D universe's structure, that wave instantaneously propagated the consciousness of the Houston handler to the moon.
People receive messages, they download information. Did it just get carried by the wave?
Yes, the information is carried through consciousness as waves. It's that tuning that I'm talking about to these quantum waves. That's at the basis of telepathy.
To date, laboratory experiments from around the world have shown significant results on telepathic contact. What does that tell us about the communication mechanism of the universe and the science of contact?
It's not too difficult to imagine that the memory of the human being is still resonant at the black hole, and that sensitive individuals can tune into that because of its physical presence there. We come to realize that there are wave patterns which are common to all species, and these are waves describing things like fear, aggression, I want, I'm happy, oh, this is lovely, bring it on. Those are all wave patterns that any brain will recognize. In a laboratory setting here in my home with another scientist, Dr. Paul Bernstein, present and doing experiments with this extraterrestrial sensing being. Dr. Bernstein and I, in the same room with him, would ask Greg, and when you're on your planet, what does your sky look like? Do you see the sun much the way we do on Earth? And Greg would often lower his head and move it around, just as I'm doing now, and obviously seeking a tuning in. And then he would look up and say, well, what they actually have on their planet is not a star, but 2 stars. And one is a very red star, and it moves the fastest and the first, and the blue one follows behind it. He was eventually able to draw a map describing the position of the star in the sky well enough that I was able to go to star maps that would be unavailable to an ordinary person because they're in the Harvard University Library. I was able to compare his drawn map to the star pattern with faint stars drawn on it and make the connection and identify the star, which Greg claims is his place of origin. And behold, there is an entry that shows that this star is not a single star, but a binary system, or two stars, one of which is red and one of which is blue. So isn't that astonishing?
If all information is stored within the surface of the black hole, then Greg's ability to tune in to his planet of origin must have been possible because of the magnetic nature of the black hole.
And we made this prediction 10 years ago, and now we're starting to be able to observe and measure magnetic fields surrounding black holes, and we find that they all have, as we predicted, strong magnetic fields. So we're coming to understand that the horizon of our universe is probably very much like the surfaces we see at black holes, except ours is inside out to the black holes we find inside our universe, meaning that the horizon of our universe holds the possibility of all universes out. So, as mathematicians, we have to ask, if this is universe plus universe plus universe plus universe, what is the sum of all of that? And then you have to ask yourself, well, what could that be except the cosmic intelligence itself?
The cosmic intelligence stores information on the surface of the black hole, and the magnetized property of the black hole allows the quantum wave to carry the information from one black hole to another, faster than the speed of light. That makes for telepathic communication across the universe. It is now clear that the gods speaking to us are transferring telepathic symbols and codes into our brain through the magnetic black holes. Some of us can tune in, retrieve these messages, and translate them into a star language.
The next really important experience for me was I was awake and there was a real being in the room. And visceral, I could touch it, see it, feel it, and then it touched my forehead. My head cocked back and my mouth began to speak in a language I had never spoken before. It's more of a tonal language where the information's encoded onto the frequencies, but to be decoded by your heart and not the brain.
Can you say something in the language?
I'll see what comes through.
Okay.
Yeah. Sua set eleaka e sulu untuk ewe elo amana e sala am at elo ala onkish susuma etala elo lo tu kishisea elo at sa osaritam mana eku e kuleate su shase e omono tu keawa ark itsu numu it ulaat it ulaakit sesa ese sala tu shasam. It doesn't exactly translate into English. The key to this language is that it's not transmitting data verbally through the mind. It's transmitting images through the voice. And dolphins do the same thing. Dolphins can transmit pictures to each other of what they're seeing through sonar.
There have been times where I have spoken a language that is very representative of a particular civilization or a particular group of beings. And when I would speak it, they would be there on the other side, listening and sending back information.
Can you give a message that you feel is important in the star language? That's even better.
Okay, all right. I'll try this, okay? Ora sa takaya, no tutia takain takatur, itakain tututi takain moto te takanar, yututi takan titi takotai, ash takotam, itakaet, umata aya tutuki, takata aya, uma takai, ote,
One of the cases that was interesting to me was the mother wrote to me saying that her daughter had reacted to some of the star languages that she'd seen on YouTube. And the daughter said, but I can speak those languages too. And she said to her mother, there's 3 of them, but one of them heals water. When I speak at water, I can purify the water. And the mother told me that the water actually tasted differently.
The star language comprises codes that can be heard, spoken, but also a message that can be transcribed.
These languages are the frequencies that are waking us up, which is another thing that many do after contact. They start to write these strange scripts, which they say come from where they're from.
So what does this mean to you?
So these symbols aren't words. They're not something you can pronounce. So you're not going to look at it and read it and come up with a verbal expression of it. These symbols are more circuitry. So if I wanted to share, I could visualize you and draw that symbol. By enacting that circuitry, I'm allowing myself to tap into the information that you're willing to share.
This amazing ability Zach has also helps explain other examples of extraterrestrial communication we have seen throughout history. For centuries, messages from otherworldly civilizations have been found in ancient artifacts, relics, archaeological findings, and monuments. One of the most well-known are the crop circles, and particularly those of Wiltshire, England, which, just like the star language, seem to contain a symbolic code language.
There's a very large variety of meanings of these crop circles that have been happening for decades now. In addition to the astronomical symbols that are shown in crop circles, there are many other things too. There were some crop circles that were showing a Celtic cross, the flower of life. They're executed in our fields in the dark of night.
This crop circle is a huge mystery. It's brand new. And honestly, you can't see anything. You have no idea what it is. So I'm going to try to figure it out as I go along. There's no way any human could have stepped onto that space and created this and then kind of, disappeared? Let's cut across here. As I'm standing in the middle of this piece, I feel something around my heart. Something is kind of like vibrating. I'm gonna make my way to the center and see what's going on. So I'm right in the center right now, and I still can't make out what it is. I feel patches of information all around,
And I feel I am at a 0 point, the center point of that information. I think we're going to have to go up there and see from up there what these guys can see looking down. Though at times our lives seem small, our planet is part of the universe. It is unimaginable that the universe would host so many life forms, for contact not to be a natural part of the universal citizenship. I went in there without any expectations, no preconceived ideas, and I was very surprised. It felt like a very low vibration. We really have to discern for ourselves. Sometimes an extraterrestrial contact is more advanced, and sometimes it just isn't. Advanced technology does not necessarily mean advanced spiritually or a higher level of consciousness. Regardless of the technology used, could there be another sign of communication between the planets themselves? After all, the Earth is part of a planetary system and therefore subject to various astronomical events.
The Shoemaker-Levy comet was hurtling across the sky and collided with planet Jupiter. It formed a certain pattern on Jupiter that was a circular pattern with crescent shapes in it. And then every couple of days, the rest of July and until the middle of August, when the next piece of Shoemaker-Levy comet actually collided with Jupiter out there in space, there would be a new crop circle that depicted that same long formation with one fewer circles in it. So every time the comet released another piece into Jupiter, that was reflected in our crop circle series. This extraterrestrial being told me that if I would like to have the experience, I could be taken for the making of a genuine crop circle in England. And just then, I saw the silhouettes of 3 short beings. They all had a wide head at the top and tapering down to a narrow little chin. They came to the bed. They levitated me up out of the bed into the bottom of the craft. They followed me. We were rising up. We flew for no more than a few minutes. And then I was aware, because the craft tipped forward, I could see from the window, and there must have been a light shining from the bottom of this craft, because I could see that we were over a wheat field. And then suddenly there was a very loud whoosh noise. And then it seemed like the whole craft went whizzing around in a circle. The whole making of that crop circle was very quick. It was probably just several seconds. And then we went back to Salisbury, and I was returned to my bed in my room and slept the rest of the night. And lo and behold, that night, a new crop circle appeared in exactly that formation as the impact site on Jupiter. This is an outstandingly wonderful example, in my opinion, of the communication that is happening in the crop circles.
Astronomical events that are reflected here on the Earth have to do with the alignment of the planets with our own. This means various points on planet Earth are aligned with specific points within the cosmos and will therefore incur unique astronomical events. They will also have distinct electromagnetic and energetic properties.
All of this information is actually following lines. It comes through this multidimensional grid system. This means interdimensional information is going to happen instantly in locations like these.
If you are standing right here on this spot and receiving telepathic information from somewhere, it's probably coming from a galactic frequency, from galactic beings as well, landing right here on the Earth. If communication is reflected in astronomical events and the alignment between the planets, then is it possible there may be a web communication system that connects our planet with the rest of the cosmos? I believe there is. We see geometric patterns throughout our planet, in nature, in the human body, the animal kingdom, and the cosmos. If physical matter is based on geometric patterns, then the space that holds matter may have the same intelligent design and create a massive cosmic web connecting every physical matter together, as well as our planet with the rest of the universe.
The planetary grid starts at the core of the planet and expands outwards to create a massive hologram of all possible geometric patterns. These patterns align the black holes in such a way as to create pathways in all directions of time and space. This means if I were to stand at this particular black hole or 0 point and look around in all possible directions, I would see a pathway leading to a specific point in the universe, perhaps in this case, to the moon. And if I were to stand right here at this black hole or 0 point, I will also see another pathway leading me straight to Mars. I call the black holes 0 points because they create a warp in the fabric of time-space. This means time-space can exist at the surface of the black hole, but ceases to exist at the center of the black hole. A difficult concept to wrap our heads around, but this theory could explain how communication could travel thousands of miles and arrive on the Earth instantly. It is because the quantum waves can bypass time and space by going through the center of the black hole and arrive at any other possible 0 point within this massive geometric hologram. This would explain why UFOs and spaceships sometimes appear and disappear, or display an erratic behavior, such as appearing here, making a 90-degree angle and reappearing there. This erratic space motion happens because the UFO is using these 0 point junctures to dip in and out of our time-space reality. The holographic nature of this grid system is what makes us connected to one another right here on the Earth, but also with the worlds beyond. All that is required is to tune in and to align our brain receptors with the pathways of space, and the messages from the universe will come pouring in.
The structuring of space can now explain the mechanics of UFOs, teleportation, and telepathic communication. Could this new quantum hologram theory become someday the theory of consciousness? And perhaps, could this be the next theory of everything?
I believe this is the theory of everything.
The possibility of a theory of everything is an exhilarating prospect because it would explain the unknown mechanics of the universe. But what about the technology used by the UFOs and the otherworldly beings that allows them to travel all the way to our planet? The answer may not be what you expect. Quantum physicist Dr. George Wiseman has conducted astounding experiments and stretched the boundaries of the current laws of physics. So you mentioned PK.
Yes.
What is it exactly and how does it work?
PK is psychokinesis, which means moving by the mind. It's also called mind over matter. It's the phenomenon that your intention can have an effect in a non-causal way. In other words, in a way that cannot be explained by normal physics. It's a direct influence on another system. Through that, you can actually experience the non-locality of the world and how your thoughts and feelings and what seems to be inside you is intimately connected with the whole. You're in alignment. The more you believe, which means basically you're open to the phenomenon, the better it works.
So how is the experiment set up?
Well, the experiment setup is that you have a paper spiral with markings on it, suspended by a very thin thread, usually a single fiber or silk thread, so that it's easy to rotate, and attached to the bottom of a cylinder, which then rests on a table and ideally is sealed off so that no currents and so on can enter. And if the environment is also stable temperature, then that spiral will simply hang down and not move, not rotate at all. Okay, when I sat down, it rotated about, maybe 10 degrees or 15 degrees or so.
From a distance, it looks like mind and matter are very different. And here we're talking not so much mind like your thoughts, but more like the essence of consciousness itself. So if that were true, then when you're asking somebody they're directing their mind towards a box that's producing random bits in it, and your intention is, I really want this to produce more ones now than zeros, which it doesn't want to do. So this kind of experiment using things like this, and also rolling of dice and all kinds of other physical systems, has been done for maybe 50 years now, probably over 50 years. Hundreds and hundreds of experiments and published in journals. And it's very clear, to me at least, and to many of my colleagues, that your will does change the fabric of physical reality.
If consciousness could change the fabric of reality and can allow us to move a physical object, could mind over matter perhaps become the technology of the future? Could this technology be the one used by the gods among us?
If that consciousness is all focused on the same intent, namely to take us all to what we understand to be the quantum signature of planet Earth, the spacecraft knows how to transmit itself to planet Earth.
Is it possible then that my consciousness could command my physical body, my personal spaceship, so to speak, to appear in a different location just the same?
In teleportation, it would be seemingly a relatively simple thing to scan this quantum description and then take them to another place that we know something about, that we also have a quantum description of as a place, and then project the one into the other.
If the extraterrestrials and intradimensional beings can fly their ships and teleport to our planet and communicate through telepathy and codes, then perhaps these powers will become part of the human capabilities at some point in the future. Are the gods among us teaching us these technologies of space travel and communication? After all, in all our seeming insignificance, many of us can already receive these messages and signals coming from the vastness of space. But for now, the future of the human capabilities relies on understanding the human DNA.
So what does this show, Glenn?
Now we have the value for the DNA before being treated. And the value here is 1.30 kiloohms. So that's our starting value. Treatment number 2. So we're going to stick the electrodes into the DNA. And then we're going to take our measurements of electrical conductivity. In this experiment, we're doing it at a very specific frequency, the resonance frequency of the DNA itself. The control might be less, so it could actually shift the frequency. And if it shows that the frequencies are shifted to higher frequencies, that supports the whole dogma in the field that spiritual energies are associated with higher frequencies.
Raise your vibration.
Raise your vibration, exactly. So this is a way here to actually prove or support that. Now, if we can analyze the conductivity value, it turns out that there were specifically 2 frequencies that got turned on and activated. The signal strength was much stronger after being treated by you. And you can see there was a very large stimulation in both frequencies. From the kind of magnitude of the changes that I've been seeing in the past when energy treats the DNA, this is a robust, strong effect. Good work.
Hey. This experiment showed scientific evidence that the energy of the spirit being I invoked had influenced the DNA sample and boosted its electrical conductivity in a significant manner. This could show that the presence of any spirit, extraterrestrial or intradimensional being, could also have a significant and tangible effect on the human DNA. For the past 25 years, Dr. Rubik and Dr. Jabs have been at the frontier of science in the field of biophoton research. Their experiments can bring more evidence about the presence of non-physical beings within our physical environment.
We're looking at a number of different ways. One is to measure the light coming from the human body in different states of consciousness. For example, from the palm of the hand, the fingertips, from the chakras down the midline, and actually all the parts of the body, but those are the main emitters. We're actually counting the photons of visible light.
Okay, this is our sensor suite, that's how we call it. Trained individuals were able to open their third eye around here at will, and when they did, the photon emission went up.
The changes can vary, say, between 30% and 400%. We can measure down to a single photon with great accuracy. So when we see changes of 10 to 50 photons per second, we know that we're seeing something significant. And when it correlates with the intent of the person to make a shift, of course, it reflects a shift in consciousness. We have some evidence of beings of light in some of our experiments. During the actual healing session, one healer said, my guides have arrived. And at that very moment, a burst of light. And again, another guide has arrived, another burst of light. That's the kind of evidence we see.
Because it was now far removed from the body, and we got a substantial burst of light, that tells me that there had to be quite a lot of light inside the chamber.
How is this even possible that higher dimensional energies can be downloaded or brought down into our ordinary 4 dimensions of space-time reality.
Who's to say that there's not information passing from one place to another that certain people might be able to perceive? There are layers of codes. There's thousands of codes layered on top of each other. You touch one part, it touches 10 other parts, because codes within codes within codes. It's an incredibly efficient, very redundantly packed machine which is operating with itself, on itself, through itself, to make the complexity of what we are.
As we peer into the vast universe, trying to detect faraway intelligence, the step we must take is to think differently about what exactly we are looking for. The message is not one piece of information sent from one place to another. The message is everywhere. It is embedded within the very fabric of the universe, on the surface of the black holes, and carried into our brains by the quantum waves. These messages appear in the form of symbols and telepathic codes, but they can also appear as a true life experience in our dreams.
And this man walks over to me, and he's wearing a tuxedo, a suit, and he's, short black hair, and he's very proper, very straight. And he explained, well, this coil is tuned to the resonant frequency of the Earth, and you're hearing the music that the Earth gives off. And he said, this is one of my prized coils. And he said, do you know who I am? And I said, no. And then he said, my name is Nikola Tesla. And he said, the reason we are having this experience is because I am to transfer information to you, and you are to know this. And he turned his coil on, and sparks began shooting everywhere. And then this aluminum disc levitated in the air and then turned into liquid in midair. And he began putting his finger in and out of it. And he said these words, and I'll never forget them. If you have an electromotive force with an electrostatic charge, you will achieve levitation. And then he said, levitation, the word, should not even be used. It is electrogravitic repulsion.
Dreams can be very powerful because they take us on a journey into the subconscious mind. Throughout the years, I had to delve into the subconscious world to understand more deeply the effect of the contact experience on my own consciousness and that of others. Contact with an extraterrestrial or interdimensional being can leave a traumatic impact on our consciousness. For this reason, I developed a methodology that helped many individuals delve into their subconscious mind and bring a deeper understanding about the messages and the meaning of their experiences. This process, in turn, helps them learn and bring closure to these events. Okay, close your eyes and breathe in through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. And just relax. Quiet your mind, quiet your thoughts. And again, breathe in through the nose. Deep, deep breath. Bring your focus to your heart. What do you sense? What do you feel?
I feel like I'm being watched from the sky and I don't know it.
That's it.
It's a massive object. It feels like a spaceship with beings inside of it.
Feel, don't guess.
Right now, we're just right outside of Earth's orbit.
How many beings are there?
I sense it's a major collection point of so many different types of creatures, including extraterrestrials, that's run by the extraterrestrials. It's almost like a Noah's Ark. They're like us, but they come from us. We come from them. They're communicating with me.
What are they saying?
We've been watching you. We've been watching over you. And there's good intent behind when she tells me this.
Focus on your heart and open your eyes. I feel that these beings were actually watching you, so you were right on with that, for a while. And it's as if this was the perfect timing for you to reconnect, although it's a little bit delayed because it's as if you were avoiding it. And that's why at one point it had to be done almost by force. That's why it feels a little bit like an abduction, a missing time. So that explains why it's so traumatic. You are a genetic code. We are all a genetic code. If you take this genetic code into a particular environment, that genetic code starts to unravel. You carrying this genetic code gives you a responsibility, which means that you are here to transform the rest of the genetic code.
Okay, I totally understand what you're saying.
How does that make you feel?
I feel recharged.
Contact has been happening through visitations, messages, dreams, and meditation, or, like Joe, through missing time. But how about those who have been abducted onto a spacecraft? What can they tell us about the gods among us?
They all describe being taken on board a UFO from their car, from their backyard, from sitting on the couch watching television, or from sleeping at night.
The Greys I had the experience with, they live aboard their spacecraft, which is sort of in Earth's atmosphere. So they just stay there and have experiences and contact and abductions with certain people that are relevant.
I woke up in my room very early in the morning, and I knew that I was not alone in the room. There were some beings. I was scared to death. I could see silvery, shiny discs like CDs flying through the room.
And suddenly I realized there were golden globes circling the room.
At one point, I noticed that an energy link had been established to me.
And I was pulled up. Like being sucked up in the tube of a vacuum cleaner.
I was sleeping and there was a very bright light which woke me up. I sat on the side of the bed and I could see a very bright light coming through the window. And I just instinctively knew that it was a craft and I was about to have contact.
I remember a vibrational feeling through my body while I was being transported to the craft that I compare to being at a concert or standing next to a speaker system and having your whole body vibrate from the sound.
I saw a red mark on my solar plexus, and that was obviously where the energy link had been established.
The craft was a disc-shaped object, silver, very shiny, and had sort of very bright white doorway that I went through to get on board the craft.
Well, I got up, stood up, looked around, and realized I was in a very circular room.
The room was very minimal. It was circular in shape.
And I thought, now, where am I now?
There was quite a few greys of different heights. Some were quite tall, some were quite short, some were sort of, middle height.
And telepathically, a communication started. A voice said to me, "Don't be afraid. I am the leader of this group. We come in peace."
Her intent at this point was to just comfort me, was to tell me everything's gonna be okay, don't worry. Your friends are in another room, you're fine. This is all supposed to happen right now.
They're going to be in a waiting room with maybe 20 or 30 other people sitting on a ledge that circles the waiting room.
Now, there were already about a dozen other humans there.
Then an alien comes in, a gray alien, and takes one of them out and takes him into a room with a table, or 2 tables, or 10 tables, depending on the size of the UFO, 100 tables.
This huge room was filled with people.
And they had a crystal bed.
I was laying on a table, and I would describe the table as almost like a Greek marble.
They did do a healing session on me, so they told me to lay down on the bed.
I see the monitors in front of me. They seem to be projecting or showing cellular structures inside my body.
They put different types of lights into it depending on what type of healing they're doing and what the person's suffering with and what part of body they're working on.
They then do a, quote, examination. We call it an examination because we don't know what they're doing.
They may see themselves on the table, they may see genetic material taken, but they also will find out there's been a healing procedure done.
And I felt very safe and secure afterwards because they came in peace.
It's astonishing how many people all around the world all saying the same thing. If you look at the population of the world, it's 203 million people around the world who are abductees.
According to abduction researchers, regression experts, and psychotherapists, the purpose of the abduction ranges from healing, teaching, experimentation, but also hybridization. In other words, genetic engineering.
I've been very aware of the hybrid beings that are created by the extraterrestrials combining with human beings. Some of them are very interested in reproducing hybrid life with human beings in various ways.
The hybridization itself can happen in several different ways. It can be eggs or sperm.
Yes, some eggs were taken from me, and they also showed me part of their breeding program where they, abduct and take men and women aboard the craft and take eggs or sperm.
It can be DNA just from a skin sample, for instance. It can be what's called an energetic imprint.
There was this alive being. There isn't any particular sort of head or facial features, but sort of very long tentacles, and it's the tentacles that will actually go up inside the female and take the eggs. And again, with the sperm, it'll actually sort of go down the penis and collect the sperm.
They take the sperm and eggs, they then inject alien DNA.
Extraterrestrial genetics of usually a few different extraterrestrial species were added to them.
They then insert the zygote into the woman,
who then carried that embryo, fetus, to full term and gave birth in the way that we all do here on Earth.
Maybe in the 11th week or whatever, they take it out and then they put it into a tank filled with a brownish liquid.
I had had several missing pregnancies, and there was no explanation as to what happened to them.
And that is where the fetus continues to grow, and eventually the baby is removed from the tank.
And that's the way I was created.
That becomes a hybrid.
I'm a part of the hybridization program. My kids, the percentages in each child varies. It can be 80% human and 20% ET, or vice versa, or 49-51.
I have 6 hybrid children that I know of, and I have met them. My first son is a reptilian, and I had a really nice experience with him and spent about 3 hours with him.
Some hybrids really look alien. Picture a young girl with very thin, straggly hair, but there is hair. A very small mouth, but it is a mouth. A nose, a tiny little nose, small little ears, a pointed chin.
Some of my kids look more human, some of them don't look so human. Cake doesn't look very human at all.
And then there's even another group who I call human hybrids. These are human in every way imaginable, and they are indistinguishable from other people.
Are these claims too difficult to believe? Dan and Cynthia are 2 of the many individuals we met who were genetically managed in the womb. They tell us their amazing story firsthand.
It was my father who told me. He said he had agreed to allow my mother to be impregnated without her knowledge with a hybrid child. And he agreed for that in exchange that he got to work on a top secret mission with the Army in Korea.
I was in the military.
And I was called in right after I got cross-trained into a new career field, which required a top secret clearance.
The doctors told my mother that I was born without an amniotic sac, and my mother didn't understand it, and nor did the doctors, of course, understand it.
He told me that I was a result of a genetic management procedure that the military had done with an alien race. And I was the progeny of this particular experiment.
The doctor felt that there was something different, that she may have gotten pregnant twice.
I was genetically managed in the womb. I was conceived normally, and then in conjunction with the US government and the aliens, they abducted American female to genetically manage their embryos so that they could have this ability to intuitively communicate.
Supposedly, you cannot carry a fetus without an amniotic sac. My twin sister, born 20 minutes later, had an amniotic sac on her. We had totally different blood types and tissue types.
I was told that the entire reason for Project Preserve Destiny was to train a cadre of individuals to be able to communicate worldwide, to form a worldwide communications network without electromagnetic energy. So, intuitively communicating didn't need electromagnetic energy.
When my twin sister was 5 years old and they discovered she had muscular dystrophy, this is when we discovered she and I were not compatible. They could not take muscle tissue from me and grow it in my twin sister because there was too much difference.
So they managed me genetically so that I could have this heightened sense of, or a heightened ability to communicate.
The other thing was when I had an accident in 1993 and had to have abdominal surgery, the doctor informed me at that time that she did me a favor, that she went in and found that my organs were growing on the wrong side of my body. And so she put them on the right side that they were supposed to be on, that humans are on. And she said I must have had a surgery where the doctor just put them back in the wrong place, which didn't quite make sense.
I think it's important that the world know that we have been visited. I mean, it's one of the most important things in the history of mankind.
I mean, if the question is, have we been edited, it's been so subtle that whoever it is that might have done it knew that we might be looking, and they did it in a way that we could never figure out. Now, I'm not saying that it's been done. I mean, that's just pure speculation. I'm giving the audience a way to think about it. The editing needs to be subtle, right? If we decide ourselves to undertake editing, we have to realize that any place we touch is actually interacting with dozens, if not thousands, of other sites, because codes within codes within codes.
If the gods among us are teaching and healing us, what would be the purpose then of the hybridization program?
There's a goal here. This is a goal-directed phenomenon. They've been working at it for years and years and years. They're here for a reason.
These hybrids, they were created by these extraterrestrial beings so that they could have someone who's made up of them and human enough to get along here, so that they could be helping to upgrade humanity.
My favorite question when people ask me about the subject, do you think they're living here? Do you think they're walking among us? I love that question because I got to say, absolutely not. There's no evidence whatsoever that aliens are living among us. And I felt sane. I felt normal. I felt like I could say no. That was great. I can't say that anymore.
There is much controversy and discrepancies regarding the current DNA testing to verify the hybridization process. How could we prove that such DNA engineering with an extraterrestrial being, or at least the partial mixing of the genetic code, could be possible? The answer could lie in the complexity of the DNA itself, which doubles every 600 million years.
It turns out that the DNA does have a Moore's law that about every 600 or so million years, the DNA complexity has doubled. That's interesting. But if you take the timeline back as to where it intersects when life must have begun, it's about 9.5 billion years ago, right? That's interesting. Why is that interesting? Because Earth has only been around about 4.5 billion years.
If the DNA existed prior to humanity and Earth itself, then it must have originated somewhere else in the universe, which makes the human DNA not so human after all. Now, more than ever, unraveling the mysteries of the DNA could get us a step closer to the science of contact with other alien races. So Glenn, I'm so excited. I want to hear about the results of the experiments we did together. I know you took 2 measurements.
They're both electrical measurements on the DNA, so what we're really measuring is the ability of the DNA to conduct electricity. And that's what we did in the first experiment. In the second experiment, I did something completely different and measured the frequencies of the energy in the molecule. And this is a technique that's called spectroscopy in the scientific community, where you measure the response of the biological system to specific excitation frequencies. I had to analyze the data from 15 different sequential measurements that I did and pull all the data together, and then I can make conclusions about which frequencies are actually stronger or weaker and which frequencies are turned on by the presence of your energy. But what I saw with you that was most unusual is that this particular frequency over here, which is 94 kilohertz, was not there in the DNA before you treated it, but it appeared after you treated it.
So where did this 94 kilohertz frequency come from?
It came from you, or your energies that you were working with. They must have resonated at that frequency in order for DNA to start resonating at that frequency.
How significant is that?
Actually, it's enormous, because the fact that DNA can take on new frequencies and can take on a frequency of another substance or another person is a new discovery. And that's a very revolutionary concept, that energies from higher dimensional beings can be transferred to us via our DNA, and that they don't actually have to inject their DNA into our bodies. They can transfer it energetically. It's actually revolutionary and quite remarkable and unexpected.
It is now clear and scientifically demonstrated that the consciousness of one being can not only be transferred to another, but can actually alter the very frequency and therefore modulate the mechanism of the DNA.
The implications are very profound indeed, because you're having a conversation with someone and you exchange ideas and you exchange emotions and you exchange energy. The idea that your DNA could be influenced and modulated by the presence of another person is obviously very profound.
It's almost certainly not an accident that all DNA is spiral in form, and consciousness waves are spiral in form. And it's possible then that a beamed, intended quantum wave interacting with DNA would excite frequencies that realign the DNA just enough that it becomes resonant to a new frequency. All of these anomalies that university professors don't know how to talk about, and so they just deny their existence and say, oh, that's just psi phenomena. They're not important. Well, what if they are?
If there were evidence of some sort of overt engineering or introduction of DNA by something else, the science is so open source at this point that the information is available to everybody. There's no grand conspiracy, right? So, but to give those who want to think that way an out, remember, codes within codes within codes. right? There's ways that perhaps you could introduce changes in such a subtle way that it wouldn't be obvious yet, at least to our level of understanding. Again, I'm not saying it exists, I'm not saying it does happen, I like to give even myself the out of, even though it's highly unlikely and perhaps astronomically impossible, don't take it off the table. Because if you take it off the table, it can never be a part of a future answer.
Hybrids, crop circles, star language, telepathy all point to one thing: contact with otherworldly beings. I invite you to think of a moment in your life where you could swear you felt the presence of someone, an angel, a ghost, or even a long-lost loved one. You may have brushed it off as an imaginary event, perhaps because it touched you in a way that you could not understand. You now have a scientific explanation for your experience, and you may simply realize you may have had a very close encounter with the other side. But is there a purpose for these encounters? Do the gods among us have a mission here on the earth?
So there are many different types of beings, and there are many different agendas that they have.
Even though they may have self-serving agendas, some of them for sure, there are others that are here to see us grow as a species.
When we detonate nuclear energy, that tears the fabric of space.
It stretches it in ways it wasn't intended to be stretched.
Some of it may very well be that we've reached a point of technology now where if we're not careful which road we go down, we could very well destroy ourselves, and we're going to affect the cosmic family as well.
And that's alarming to other participants sharing the same quantum space, and they say, this has got to stop. This is not aligned with the purpose and direction of the universe. These people need help.
So I think there's a rapid upgrade to get us from the 3-year-old with a loaded gun to realizing as an adult that a loaded gun kills people.
They will lead us into telepathic abilities. They will lead us into abilities to heal ourselves, to literally change our body.
This is the bigger picture, the world and humanity as a whole. Just like here on Earth, there may be different agendas, some good, some bad. We don't have to be a special product of an alien or a government project. We all have the ability and free will to tap directly into the knowledge of the cosmos and align ourselves with the energies and the beings of our choosing. But what will it take for the truth about the extraterrestrial presence to surface on the Earth and become common knowledge for everyone?
I started working with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo astronaut, for 5 years. We researched the extraterrestrial presence. So Edgar and I wanted to go to the White House to meet with Barack Obama and John Podesta. And so I began an email exchange and a phone exchange from my email to John Podesta's email. We framed our meeting about disclosure. And then suddenly, Podesta was getting ready to work with Hillary Clinton and her campaign, and so it never happened. All of the communication that I had had, they'd all gone into WikiLeaks, which, to my way of thinking, is the perfect kind of disclosure. The fact that John Podesta's office was talking about setting up meetings on disclosure with not only himself, but also the president.
If their presence is revealed, the winners being the ordinary people who will now find that they are part of a bigger plan, their life has more meaning than they had come to know.
If there is one thing I've learned, is that there is always more to discover about the universe and about ourselves. For all the vastness of the cosmos, the key to moving humanity forward is moving the individual first.
I realized that who I thought I was before a mother, a professional, a wife, a community member, that all of those parts of me were still in place. And so all of a sudden, this extraterrestrial nature that I began to be aware of opened up the fact that there was an extraterrestrial component that I needed to begin to integrate into understanding who I was, how I went about my life, and it began to make sense to me why I could communicate with all these ETs. I could communicate with the ETs because I was an ET.
My mission is to facilitate the transmission of very important spiritual basics that will help all of us here develop our own spiritual abilities.
My mom always loved to ask me that question. Who are you? What do you want to be in life? What are your dreams, And I said, I came here to help save the planet, Mommy.
What comes next is that together, extraterrestrial experiencers create an extraterrestrial reality.
It offers help to a troubled civilization.
During my experiences when I was aboard crafts, I saw children my age on the craft, so I know there are thousands of children around the world who have all had very similar experiences to me.
It is time for humanity to really wake up and to be aware and accepting of the fact that we are not alone in this universe and that the universe is full of intelligent beings.
Human beings are so amazing, but they've got to believe it first.
It's not us versus them. It is more that we are all consciousness, part of a much bigger story, and it just happens that humans are a type of consciousness and other beings are another type of consciousness collaborating together in one time-space dimension or another, but all for the same purpose, which is the evolution of species and the evolution of the universe.
We have to become one with one another and even beyond that, Gaia, and one with the cosmos.
Do you find it exciting to think that you might be, or all of us as individuals might be part of such a grand design? And doesn't it expand your vision of the possibilities of your existence and of life itself? Wow. Isn't this a fascinating grand vision?
It is the remembrance of who we are in our totality, of where we've come from to get to where we are now, and being grateful and appreciative and understanding of who we are and our roles that we play as humans on this planet.
There you have it. You have the potential to awaken to the bigger picture and accept your galactic and universal citizenship if you so choose. I showed you the evidence, but no matter what I or the experts say, when you have the experience, you will find your own truth. So perhaps the first step is to consider that it is no longer about the gods among us, but rather that you may be a god among the gods.